In the emerald hills of a distant kingdom nestled between mountains and rivers, a child was born on the first day of spring. Her name was Neria, and from the moment her golden eyes opened to the world, the palace healers whispered that she was touched by something divine. Her mother, Queen Amina, was not just the consort of the kind King Zubri, but a healer of unmatched grace and wisdom, loved by the people for her gentle hands and her voice that calmed the wildest storms. They said that when Amina walked through the villages, even the sickest children reached for her robes, and flowers seemed to bloom in her shadow. The people adored her, and when she held her baby up for all to see, the cheers rang across the valleys. The girl with the golden eyes would one day carry her mother's legacy, or so they believed. But fate, ever cruel and unpredictable, cast its shadow early. Queen Amina fell ill in the girl's 7th year. No tincture or charm could cure her. Even her own healing touch failed her, and on a rainy morning, she slipped away in her sleep, her hand still resting on Neria's head, as if blessing her daughter one last time. The kingdom mourned, but no one wept harder than the king and his golden-eyed child. Without Amina, the palace changed. Silence replaced music. The halls once filled with herbs and laughter now echoed only with the rustle of silks and distant whispers. For a year, the king refused to entertain the thought of remarriage. But advisors and noble families began to press. They spoke of alliances, of heirs, of loneliness. Eventually, he relented. Lady Jalika arrived from the southern lands, her smile all sweetness, her tone soaked in honey. She was a noblewoman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, a widow with a daughter of her own, Noma, dark-haired, plain in face but sharp in mind. The king, weary and still broken by grief, allowed her into his heart, perhaps out of duty more than desire. Within a season, they were wed, and Jalika was crowned queen consort. But she was no Amina. Jalika quickly sensed that no matter how many jewels she wore or how many servants she commanded, she would never occupy the same sacred space Amina had held. The people still whispered Queen Amina's name with reverence. The palace staff still looked for the scent of lavender that once lingered in the halls. Worst of all, the child Neria, now growing into a tall, graceful young girl, had inherited all of her mother's beauty. Her skin was a rich bronze that glowed like polished gold in the sun. Her long curls framed a face of perfect symmetry, and her golden eyes held something otherworldly. Everywhere she went, people bowed lower, smiled wider, and offered their finest gifts. Even foreign visitors brought offerings for the girl with the eyes of light. Jalika burned with resentment. She had hoped that by marrying the king, her daughter Noma would rise in status. But Noma remained in the background, always a shadow behind Neria's radiance. No matter how finely Jalika dressed her, or how loudly she praised her in court, Noma was barely noticed. The courtiers chuckled softly behind their hands, saying things like, "The wrong daughter shines," or, "Perhaps beauty skips a generation." Neria, for her part, was unaware of the tension brewing beneath the silken smiles. She greeted her stepmother with respect, though she never called her mother. She treated Noma with kindness, often offering to braid her hair or share her sweets. But even her innocence, even her attempts at sisterhood, were taken as insults by Jalika. She could not bear to see Neria praised while her own blood was overlooked. The kingdom, meanwhile, buzzed with anticipation. News arrived from the neighboring empire of Camera, a land of gold deserts and tall palaces, that their young prince, Prince Elian, was coming of age and seeking a bride. A grand journey had been planned, and during the kingdom of Zubri's annual festival of flowers, Elian would make his first public appearance and observe the daughters of the nobility. The festival was a time of song, dance, and floral offerings, where noble families presented their daughters in elaborate displays of grace and talent. Whispers traveled faster than fire in dry grass. Every noblewoman with a daughter began preparations, and none more so than Jalika. She knew the eyes of the world would be on her stepdaughter, and she would not let Neria steal this moment from Noma. No, she told herself, this time Neria would fade into the background where she belonged. The seeds of a plan began to bloom in Jalika's mind, dark and thorned. She started subtly. Dresses that were meant for Neria mysteriously disappeared and were found ruined. Tutors who once trained Neria in music and etiquette were dismissed and replaced by ones who sneered at her or undermined her lessons. Servants were instructed to delay her meals or tamper with her lotions. Little by little, Jalika hoped to dull her shine. But it wasn't enough. Even in simple gowns and with unstyled hair, Neria glowed. Her laughter still lit up rooms, and her golden eyes still held every gaze. The kingdom had grown up watching her. She was their star, their miracle child. The prince would notice her, Jalika was sure of it, and everything would be lost. So she began to consider more sinister options. Things whispered in corners, things involving coin and silence. Neria must not attend the festival. She must be hidden, or ruined. And all the while, Neria continued her days, training in her music, strolling through the palace gardens, helping injured birds and singing lullabies to crying children. She missed her mother more each day, often staring into the mirror and wondering if Amina would be proud of the girl she was becoming. She had no idea that shadows were gathering around her. That her stepmother's gaze had turned from resentment to venom. That plans were already unfolding that would change her life, and her face, forever. The entire kingdom stirred with excitement as the first petals of spring blanketed the capital in a riot of color. The Festival of Flowers was not merely a celebration, it was a declaration of life, unity, and renewal. Banners of silk fluttered from palace balconies, and every child ran through the streets clutching hand-woven wreaths. For nobles, the festival meant something more, a chance to display their daughters in dazzling light, a chance for favor, for matches, for power. This year, more than any other, there was a hum beneath the surface of the joy, a whisper that Prince Elian of Camera would attend, seeking a bride not of bloodline alone, but of soul. Within the royal palace, preparations surged. Tailors stitched late into the night. Dancers rehearsed under moonlight. Florists were given entire wings of the palace to craft their wonders. And at the center of it all was Neria. The king, still proud despite years of quiet sorrow, had named his daughter the official royal flower-bearer. She would lead the parade of blossoms, walking at the front in a gown of living petals, symbolizing hope, legacy, and the unity of the kingdom. It was an undeniable honor, and the court could not stop buzzing. "The girl with the golden eyes will open the festival," they said. Who could look at another with her leading the way? Jalika's smile was painted on like cracked porcelain. Every word of praise for Neria was a dagger to her plans. Noma, her own daughter, would be presented too, but how could she compete when the entire kingdom awaited a glimpse of Neria? Jalika knew she had to act swiftly. That night, she summoned her old handmaiden, a woman named Sai, who had once studied forbidden brews in the desert shrines before her exile. From a locked box wrapped in seals of ash and bone, Jalika retrieved a small pouch of enchanted herbs. The mixture was rare, one that attacked not the mind, nor the heart, but the skin, the nails, the glow of beauty itself. Administered slowly, it would wither radiance like frost to a bloom, while leaving no trace. Jalika mixed the first dose into a sweet tea of rose and chamomile and sent it to Neria's chamber with a message, a gift of calm for the royal bearer. Neria, who always received her stepmother's gestures with naive grace, sipped the tea before bed. The flavor was pleasant, the scent soft. She had no reason to doubt. But that night, something changed. As she drifted into sleep, her dreams thickened. She found herself standing in a forest of silver-leaf trees, beneath a sky of molten gold. A voice, a woman's voice, gentle and firm, called her name. "Neria," it said, echoing through the boughs. "The flower grows, but the shadow watches. Do not drink from hands that hide their face." The image shifted, and she saw a harp, glowing faintly, strings trembling with sound though no one played it. Neria woke covered in sweat, heart pounding. The dream lingered like a melody she almost remembered. She shook it off, thinking it a phantom of nerves. But it happened again the next night. And again. Each time the forest, the voice, and the harp appeared. Each time the warnings grew clearer. "Eyes may lie," the voice said, "but music never does." She began to notice odd things. Her skin, which should have dulled with exhaustion, glowed more vividly than before. Her hair, unwashed for days, still shimmered like polished obsidian. Her senses sharpened. She could hear the wings of bees in the gardens. She could smell lies on people's breath. She began to feel things, threads of emotion, whispers of intention, floating around her. It frightened her. One evening, overwhelmed by the strange energy coursing through her, Neria slipped away to the old garden temple her mother once tended. There, in a sealed chamber, lay Queen Amina's beloved harp, a sacred heirloom she had forbidden anyone else to touch. Neria had not dared approach it since her mother's passing. But tonight, something called to her. Her fingers, trembling, brushed the strings. The harp answered with a single note, clear, high, and aching. The moment it rang out, the wind in the garden stilled. A hush fell over the space as though the world were listening. She sat before it, and the music poured out of her like breath. She played a melody she did not know she knew, sweet, mournful, familiar. She closed her eyes and let her fingers move. And far away, in a camp of silk tents beyond the northern river, a prince paused mid-step. Prince Elian, traveling incognito with his guard toward the kingdom, heard something no one else did, a thread of music so pure it seemed born of air. He turned to the breeze, brow furrowed. "Did you hear that?" he asked his squire. The boy shook his head. "Only the wind, my lord." Elian said nothing more, but that night, as he sat beside the fire, the melody haunted him. He could not name the tune, but he knew this, it had been meant for him. Back in the palace, Jalika grew increasingly disturbed. Instead of weakening, Neria seemed to be blooming. Her eyes shone brighter. Her presence drew even more attention. Something had gone wrong. Sai suggested increasing the dose, but Jalika hesitated. Too much, and Neria might fall ill too visibly, raising suspicion. What Jalika did not know was that the poison, tainted with old desert magic, had met a bloodline it could not tame. Amina, healer and descendant of seers, had passed on more than grace to her child. Her gifts had slept dormant, waiting to awaken. And the poison, instead of breaking Neria, had become the key that unlocked her power. Still, Neria remained unsure. Her dreams, her senses, her music, what did it all mean? She dared not speak of it, fearing it was madness. Only the harp brought her peace, and each time she played it, the feeling returned, the sense that someone, somewhere, was listening. And they were. The night before the Festival of Flowers, the palace shimmered under lanterns shaped like blossoms, each floating through the air like a dream. Laughter echoed through marbled corridors, and nobles rehearsed their greetings and bows in their chambers. The scent of roses and jasmine clung to everything. Neria, unaware of the storm approaching her, stood in the moonlit garden, practicing her harp with trembling fingers. The dream had returned again, this time the voice had said, "Beauty fades. Fire stays. Beware the garden under false stars." She hadn't understood what it meant. She looked around. The royal garden had been her mother's haven, and now it was hers, a place of music, of peace. The scent of the blooms comforted her, and she closed her eyes and let the harp sing again. But not far beyond the hedges, for figures moved like shadows. Lady Jalika, driven to madness by her stepdaughter's resilience and increasing radiance, had grown desperate. She knew that if Neria appeared at the festival, no man, no prince, would even glance at Noma. So she made a final, cruel decision. If Neria could not be erased politically, she would be erased physically. She summoned 4 men from the edge of the kingdom, mercenaries with no names, paid in gold and silence. Her only command, ruin her face. Make her unrecognizable. Make her forgettable. They waited until the bells of midnight rang. Neria, lulled by her music and the warmth of spring, had no warning. The first blow knocked the harp from her lap. The second cut across her cheek. Panic rose like bile in her throat as she stumbled back, trying to scream, but a hand clamped over her mouth. They dragged her through the garden, slicing her skin with cold precision. The blades did not seek death, they sought distortion. Beauty, symmetry, grace, they carved all of it away. They worked swiftly and silently, as trained, until her golden dress was soaked in blood and her face unrecognizable. Then they tossed her body over the garden wall into the thick forest beyond, assuming she was dead or would be soon. One man paused. "She's still breathing." But the leader shook his head. "Not for long." They disappeared into the night. By dawn, the palace buzzed with excitement. Jalika, dressed in mourning black despite the festival's colors, claimed Neria had run off, perhaps overwhelmed. She wept publicly. The king, confused and increasingly feeble in age, believed her. No one searched. But the forest had eyes. An old woman, blind in both eyes but sharp in every other sense, had awoken in her hut beyond the eastern ridge with a pain in her chest. Mama Tano, once midwife and healer to Queen Amina, had long lived in exile, tending to herbs, whispering to trees, and remembering a child with golden eyes. That morning, she followed the scent of blood through the forest. She found Neria near a brook, barely alive, face torn but eyes glowing. Without hesitation, Mama Tano carried her home. For weeks, Neria drifted between fever and pain. In her nightmares, she relived the blades again and again. Mama Tano fed her herbs that numbed the agony and slowed infection. Poultices of silverroot and bittershade were applied to her wounds. Her skin tried to knit itself together, but scars bloomed where beauty once was. Still, her eyes remained untouched, clear and golden, a fire in a broken sky. When Neria finally awoke fully, she screamed, not in pain, but in shame. Mama Tano said nothing. She handed her a mirror made from polished obsidian. Neria stared and wept. "How can I ever be me again?" she whispered. "You are not meant to be who you were," Mama Tano said. "You are becoming something more." At first, Neria rejected the old woman's wisdom. She wanted to vanish. She would sit in corners, wrapped in veils, refusing to speak. But Mama Tano would not let her rot. She pushed her every day, mentally, physically. "You must learn to look with more than eyes," she said. "To walk with more than legs. You are your mother's daughter. You were not born to wilt." Slowly, painfully, Neria began to heal. She learned to boil roots and read the whispers of wind through leaves. She trained her hands to fight and her mind to sharpen. Mama Tano taught her how to breathe through panic and see with her heart. "The world thinks beauty is skin," the old woman would say, "but true beauty is purpose." Neria's hands grew stronger. Her steps steadier. She wrapped her face in scarves when she walked through the forest, and found birds still followed her songs. But the pain was still there, deep inside, curled like a serpent. The betrayal. The loss. The silence from the palace. One day, she asked, "Did they even look for me?" Mama Tano was silent. That night, Neria stood beneath the moon, holding the harp she had found in the wreckage. The strings were broken, the body cracked. But still, it called to her. She plucked a single note. And though her fingers trembled, the sound was true. "I will return," she whispered. Her scars itched as if they heard her vow. Her eyes blazed gold in the moonlight. She was no longer the girl who sang in gardens. She was something else now. And she was not done. The capital pulsed with celebration, a sea of flowers and music cloaking the grief of one missing princess. Lanterns floated through the sky like drifting stars, and petals carpeted the streets in a riot of color. Nobles and commoners alike sang and danced, raising cups of sweet wine and honeyed tea. Lady Jalika glided through the court like a spider in a web, Noma at her side, dressed in silks, draped in pearls, her face powdered to perfection. Noma was presented before the visiting prince in the Hall of Blossoms. Dancers performed. Perfumed offerings burned in brass bowls. Courtiers whispered hopeful bets that the union would be sealed. But the prince, tall and dark-eyed, remained unmoved. He bowed politely, offered a few gracious words, but never looked at Noma twice. His expression was distant, as though he was listening for something else entirely. Prince Thariel was known not only for his diplomatic brilliance and sense of justice but for his unusual heart, one that chased beauty of soul, not merely of skin. On the first night of the festival, as the nobles danced, he slipped away from the palace. Something had caught his ear, a song. A delicate, haunting melody that came from beyond the palace walls, notes from a harp, drifting like smoke into the night air. He followed it to the edge of the forest, where the petals no longer lay thick and the air grew cooler, lonelier. He returned again the next night. And again. He never saw the player, only heard the harp and sometimes a soft voice humming with it. The song seemed woven from sorrow and hope, familiar yet unknowable. One night, he saw her silhouette through the trees, veiled, seated on a rock, her fingers dancing across the harp's battered strings. The song paused when he stepped closer, and she stood quickly. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to frighten you." "Then you should not walk like a hunter," the woman said gently. Her voice was low and calm, shaped by patience and pain. "I come only to listen," the prince replied. She hesitated, then sat again, fingers poised above the strings. "Then listen. But stay in the shadows." He did. Each night, he returned to her like a moth to flame. He learned her name was Mari, a name Neria had chosen for herself in this second life. She told him little else, and never lifted her veil. Still, they spoke about music, the stars, healing plants, the shape of sadness. Her voice reminded him of spring rain on stone, soft, persistent, awakening. She never told him she had once been royalty. He never told her he was a prince. Their words became like thread, weaving something new each night. She spoke of strength found in suffering, of voices lost and found again. He listened with his whole body, absorbing the truth beneath her veil. One night, he asked, "Why do you hide your face?" She was silent for a long time. Then, "Because the world only sees with eyes." "I would like to see with more than that," he said. "Your music, it's the same song I once heard in a palace garden, long ago." She turned sharply. "What garden?" He paused, unsure why he felt so certain. "It belonged to a girl I once saw, only for a moment. She had golden eyes and played a harp that made everyone weep without knowing why." She stared at him. Her heart trembled, aching to spill the truth, but fear was stronger. "She sounds like a dream," Neria said. He looked away. "She was. And I think I've been looking for her ever since." The wind stirred her veil, lifting it slightly, but only enough to reveal a sliver of her cheek, a glimpse of scarred skin. He saw it and did not flinch. "Instead," he said, "your voice, it's hers. I know it. Your soul, it's familiar. Even if I never see your eyes, I'd still know." Tears burned behind her veil. "You speak kindly," she whispered. Too kindly. But that night, she could not sleep. His words stirred something buried deep inside, something tender and fragile, a warmth she thought she'd lost. She returned to her harp, but her fingers shook too much to play. Her heart beat like thunder. The next evening, he returned again. He brought her a small flower in a wooden box. "It's called moonscent. It only blooms at night. I saw it and thought of you." She took it with trembling hands. "Why me?" "Because you only appear at night," he said with a smile, "but your beauty lingers after sunrise." Her veil fluttered again in the wind, and for a moment, their eyes met. His breath caught. Golden. Burning. Impossible. But he said nothing. And she said nothing. She turned away quickly, heart racing. He could not stop looking. "I know those eyes," he whispered. She froze. But then she lowered her veil just slightly again, just enough for him to see that it was true. The girl from the garden. The girl from the palace. The girl who had disappeared. But before he could say another word, she stood. "Not yet," she said. "Please. Not yet." And she disappeared into the trees, leaving only the sound of her harp echoing behind her. He did not chase. He simply whispered, "I will wait." And from the shadows, she heard. The palace glittered that evening with opulence fit for legends. Every torch burned higher, every chandelier shone brighter, as the grand royal ball commenced. It was the final night of the Festival of Flowers, the night the prince was expected to choose his bride. Musicians filled the air with melodies of triumph and yearning, and nobles from every corner of the realm paraded in silks and gemstones, eager to witness a royal decision that would ripple across kingdoms. Lady Jellica sat like a queen beside her daughter Noma, dressed in layers of crimson and gold, her smile calculated and sharp. Noma had been polished to radiant perfection, her skin glowing with oils, her lips stained with berry. Jellica had arranged everything, courtiers spreading whispers, a dress sewn to mimic the colors of the prince's family crest, dancers positioned to frame Noma at just the right angle when the prince entered. And yet, the moment Prince the Real stepped into the ballroom, a shadow passed across Jellica's heart. He looked through Noma, again. His expression was pleasant but detached, as though seeking something else entirely. Meanwhile, across the city, Neria stood before a cracked mirror in Mama Tano's hut, heart pounding like a war drum. Her scars were veiled by a handcrafted half-mask adorned with midnight blue stones. The lower half of her face was visible, smooth and untouched, lips painted soft rose. Her golden eyes, fierce and steady, gleamed from behind the mask like twin flames. She wore a flowing gown Mama Tano had saved from her own youth, once belonging to Neria's mother. It shimmered like water in moonlight. A thin ribbon, woven by Queen Amina's hands years ago, was tied loosely around her wrist. "Are you ready?" Mama Tano asked, adjusting the veil of her hood. Neria nodded. "As I'll ever be." With quiet enchantments cloaking her presence, they made their way to the palace by back paths, slipping into the ballroom unnoticed, as more guests arrived late. Inside, all eyes turned when Zuri, the name Neria had chosen, stepped into the hall. She was unfamiliar, veiled in elegance and mystery. Nobles whispered. Even Queen Rena, the prince's aunt, paused her conversation to look. But no one could name her. Except the prince. His heart stopped when he saw her. He crossed the hall with intent. "May I have this dance?" he asked, bowing low. Neria took his hand without a word. Their fingers met like magnets. The music shifted. A waltz bloomed from the orchestra. They moved as though they had danced 100 times before. "You came," he said softly, studying her eyes. She tilted her head. "I'm not sure who you think I am." "Then let me guess," he said. "You hide your face but not your heart. You move like someone who's lived through a storm. And your eyes," his voice faltered. "They've haunted my dreams." Her lips curved, just slightly. "That could describe many women. But not you," he said. Their dance ended, but the prince refused other partners. He followed her with his gaze wherever she moved, watching how she carried herself, light but steady, as though every step was a triumph. Noma watched from the edge of the room, her face tight with fury. She recognized something about Zuri, the way the prince looked at her, the quiet poise. When Zuri passed close, Noma stepped in front of her. "Lovely mask," she said loudly. "A shame it hides so much." Zuri met her gaze calmly. "Some things are worth hiding." "Or maybe you're hiding something ugly," Noma sneered. The crowd quieted. Eyes turned toward them. Before Noma could reach for the mask, the prince was beside them. "Is there a problem?" Zuri bowed. "Not at all, Your Highness." She turned and drifted away as another song began, blending into the crowd with grace. Noma stood seething, cheeks flushed, while Jellica approached swiftly and pulled her aside. "That girl is dangerous," Jellica hissed. "Find out who she is." But Zuri was already slipping away. As the midnight bell neared, Neria moved through the palace halls like smoke, unseen. She paused at the base of a marble staircase, heart pounding. She untied the ribbon from her wrist, her mother's ribbon, the last piece of her old self, and left it coiled on the lowest step like a whisper of the truth. Then she vanished into the night. The prince found the ribbon moments later. His breath caught as he touched it, feeling something deep in his chest ignite. He knew the weave, he'd seen it once in a painting of Queen Amina. It was no ordinary thread. He turned to his guards. Find her. He searched the palace, then the gardens, then beyond the gates, but she was gone. Back in her hut, Neria tore off the mask and collapsed into Mama Tano's arms, weeping. Not from regret, but from overwhelming hope. For the first time since the attack, she had walked among them. She had danced. She had been seen. But in the depths of the palace, Jalika had begun her own hunt. She consulted a dark-robed man in a room lit only by green fire. His eyes were blind but saw through illusion. She goes by Zuri, Jalika said. Find her. Destroy her. The sorcerer placed a hand to the ground and whispered to the dust. The fire flared. I will find her, he said. She is marked by pain and by power. Outside, the wind shifted. The hunter had been unleashed. Night fell without calm over the capital, its skies streaked with nervous clouds and winds that whispered omens. Inside Mama Tano's hut, Neria stood in silence, her blade wrapped across her back, her half-mask lying untouched beside a pouch of herbs. Her scars caught the moonlight as she laced her boots with trembling fingers. She could feel it, danger was coming. The sorcerer had done his work well. From the shadows of the forest, for masked assassins crept, blades soaked in dark runes, spells whispered under their breath to silence the grass beneath their steps. But Neria was not the fragile girl they expected. The moment they crossed the perimeter, the leaves stirred unnaturally, her magic sensed them. Neria moved like a storm in the dark, her body responding before her mind could form the thought. The first assassin lunged, only to find a knife flying into his throat before he could blink. The others circled. From the trees, she drew power, not just from the earth, but from memory. Her mother's voice echoed, "Never fear pain. It sharpens you." The next two came at once. She dodged low, sweeping one's legs with a kick and striking the other with an open palm that unleashed a pulse of golden energy. The final one hesitated. "Go back," she said, her voice low, shimmering with unnatural force. He fled into the woods. Neria collapsed to her knees, panting. Her palms glowed faintly. Mama Tano arrived moments later, her eyes wide. "You held back," the old woman said. "You could have killed them all in seconds." "I didn't want to," Neria whispered. "Not anymore." By morning, the hut was packed. People from her mother's village had arrived, quiet warriors, hidden loyalists, those who had remained faithful to Queen Amina even after her death. Mama Tano had called them, and they came bearing heirlooms, a scroll bearing Queen Amina's seal, her marriage pendant, and a tapestry hidden for years that showed a child with golden eyes in her mother's arms. "It's time," Mama Tano said. So they journeyed to the capital. Neria wore no mask this time. Her scars were visible, glowing faintly gold in some places where her magic had begun to thread itself into her healing. She wore a dark green cloak, Queen Amina's color, and the woven ribbon was pinned to her breast. The palace gates trembled at her arrival. When she stepped through them, surrounded by allies, courtiers gasped. Some bowed without realizing. Others whispered, uncertain whether they were seeing a ghost or a queen reborn. The king sat in his throne, thinner and grayer than Neria remembered. He looked up wearily as the court parted. Jalika stood tall beside him, lips thin, eyes alert. The prince was seated at his father's right, his face unreadable until he saw her. He stood at once. "Neria?" The whole court stilled. Jalika's face contorted. "That is an impostor. A witch sent to stir unrest." "I am Neria," she said, voice unwavering. "Daughter of Queen Amina. The girl you left bleeding in the woods." Gasps erupted. Someone dropped a goblet. Neria stepped forward and laid the ribbon gently on the floor before the prince. "You kept this," she said. He knelt before her. "I never stopped searching for you." The king looked between them, confusion and recognition dawning in his weary eyes. "The golden eyes," he whispered. "She has her mother's eyes." "Lies!" Jalika screamed. "She's bewitched you all." Neria raised her hand. The scroll and pendant were presented by Mama Tano. This proves my birthright. These, she pointed to her scars, prove your betrayal. Then, from the back of the hall, a man stood and shouted, I remember Queen Amina. She healed my brother with her own hands. Another, I remember Neria, even as a child. She danced with the village children and brought food to the sick. Voices rose. She is the true heir. Lady Jalika tried to poison her, everyone knew. The court dissolved into thunderous argument. Nobles chose sides. Guards hesitated, unsure whether to draw blades or take orders. Jalika turned to the king. You'll believe this burned ghost over your wife? The king didn't answer. But the prince did. He turned to the guards. Take Lady Jalika into custody until a tribunal can be called. Chaos exploded. Jalika screamed, summoning a blast of wind with hidden magic, but Neria raised her hand, her own power flashing golden and colliding with Jalika's. A wave of light surged through the throne room, knocking Jalika backward. She collapsed, unconscious. In the silence that followed, the king stood slowly. Let no one doubt, he said, voice shaking, that Queen Amina's daughter has returned. The people in the court fell to their knees. Outside, word spread like fire. The forgotten queen's daughter, scarred, powerful, and true, had come back to claim what was hers. And the people were ready. The royal square had never held such a crowd. From the youngest child perched on rooftops to aged villagers leaning on walking sticks, all gathered to witness the long-awaited reckoning. The air buzzed with tension, the sun veiled in thin clouds as if even the sky were watching cautiously. It was the day of the trial of truth. King Roa, looking older than ever, took his place on the judgment seat. He had not spoken to Lady Jalika since her capture. His once beloved wife now stood in chains beside her daughter, Noma, who kept her head bowed in shame. Neria stood across from them in a long white robe tied with her mother's ribbon, flanked by the prince and Mama Tano. The king raised his hand. Today we lay bare what has long festered in shadows. A trial of words, and then, a trial of flame. Let truth reveal itself. Jalika stepped forward, chin high. I love this kingdom. I did what I must to protect my daughter from jealousy and betrayal. Neria was a threat, cursed blood, marked by magic. I only sought to shield my family. Whispers rippled through the crowd. She was a child, Neria replied, voice quiet but piercing. You tried to erase me for your ambition. Jalika turned to the crowd. Do you not see? Look at her scars. Look at her powers. She communes with things beyond our world. But then came the witnesses. An old kitchen maid stepped forward, wringing her hands. I used to serve Queen Amina, she said. She was the kindest soul I ever knew. And after her death, Lady Jalika told us never to speak the Queen's name again. We were punished if we did. Next came a stable boy, then a former guard, each one offering pieces of a puzzle, stories of herbs switched, meals tampered with, nighttime whispers and forbidden wings of the palace. More damning than all was the testimony of Mama Tano. I held Neria in my arms the day she was born, she said, raising her staff. And I found her broken body in the woods after Lady Jalika's men slashed her face. I healed her, trained her, and now I testify on her truth. Gasps echoed. Noma lifted her head. She told me Neria died from illness, Noma said suddenly, her voice cracking. All these years, I believed her. But now I remember the night she sent the servants away. The day she forbid me from entering the garden. I saw the blades. I was too afraid to ask questions. Jalika's eyes widened. You foolish girl. Tears rolled down Noma's cheeks. I thought you loved me. But you raised me to be your pawn. The king closed his eyes. There will be no more words. Let the flames speak. At the center of the square, the priests of Anhui descended, carrying ancient braziers. From them rose fire, not ordinary flames, but pale blue, flickering with unnatural stillness. These were the soul flames, sacred magic that could not be deceived. When walked through, they exposed the truth hidden within one's soul. The innocent would emerge cleansed, the guilty would suffer as their soul's darkness was scorched bare. Lady Jalika of the House of Quail, the head priest, intoned. "Will you walk first?" She scoffed. "This is madness." The crowd murmured angrily. The prince's jaw tightened. "If you speak truth," said the king, "you have nothing to fear." With an air of disdain, Jalika stepped into the flames. What followed was not silence but screams, horrible, shrieking screams as the fire hissed and surged around her. Illusions flickered around her body, visions of poisoned cups, of gold passed into hands under tables, of shadowed meetings with the sorcerer. The crowd watched in horror as each lie became a phantom, dancing around her like accusing ghosts. When she stumbled out, her gown was scorched and her skin blistered, not from the fire itself, but from the truth it had ripped out. She collapsed to the ground, sobbing and furious. Next came Neria. As she approached the flames, the prince reached for her hand. "You don't have to prove yourself to them." "I'm not doing it for them," she said. "I'm doing it for my mother." She stepped in. At first, the flames coiled around her like curious creatures. Then they began to rise, bright and golden where they had been pale for Jalika. Images bloomed, a small girl playing the harp, bringing herbs to the sick, weeping beside her mother's grave, shielding her face as blades descended. The people watched, silent, as the fire shimmered around her like a crown. When she emerged, she glowed faintly. Her scars were still there, but they seemed to pulse with light, as if the flames had chosen not to erase them, but to honor them. "She is truth," said the priest. "Her soul burns clean." The king stood. "Lady Jalika is hereby sentenced to exile. You shall live out your days in the desert of Kuro, never to step foot on royal soil again." Jalika did not protest. Her strength was gone. The king turned to Noma. "And you, daughter of Jalika, you may yet redeem yourself. If you choose to stay, you must renounce your mother's ways and serve the kingdom openly." Noma fell to her knees. "I wish to stay. I wish to learn what kindness is." The crowd began to cheer, not with wild abandon, but with the quiet reverence of people who had seen justice. A storm had passed, and something sacred had survived. The trial was over. But the story was not. The sun was setting beyond the palace towers, casting long shadows that danced over the newly cleansed courtyards. The kingdom was no longer the same place of whispered fears and hidden poisonings. It had become a land alive with hope and change, a rebirth born from scars and courage. In the throne room, the prince stood before Neria, his voice steady but filled with reverence. "Neria," he said, "through your trials you have shown a strength I have never known. Not because of your beauty, though your eyes shine like stars, but because of your spirit, your unwavering truth, and the kindness that could not be extinguished. Will you marry me?" For a moment, Neria's heart fluttered in confusion and fear. Marriage had once been a cage she never wished to enter again, a life of silence and shadow. But this was different. This was a promise of partnership and respect. She looked into the prince's eyes, seeing not just a ruler but an ally, a companion. "I will," she said quietly, "but on one condition, I will govern alongside you, not as a silent bride, but as an equal." The prince smiled, relief and joy lighting his face. "You have my word." The wedding was unlike any before. Not a grand display of luxury and pomp, but a gathering of people from all walks of life. The poor, the healers, the children, and the elders filled the gardens, welcoming the dawn of a new era. When Neria and the prince took their vows, it was a vow to rebuild, not only the palace but the very soul of their kingdom. Together, Neria and the prince worked tirelessly. They purged the core of corruption and greed, replacing fear with fairness. They opened the palace gates to healers and scholars, inviting knowledge and wisdom back into the halls. Among their greatest achievements was founding a school for girls, named the School of Queen Amina, to honor Neria's mother and her legacy of healing and hope. Neria's scars, once a mark of shame in her stepmother's cruel eyes, became a symbol of justice and healing throughout the land. mothers would tell their daughters stories of the brave girl whose wounds never dimmed her spirit. Artists painted her likeness, not to hide the scars but to celebrate the light that shone through them. Her golden eyes, untouched by the cruelest darkness, were said to see the truth in every heart. Noma, once the pawn of her mother's ambition, chose a new path. She returned to the school as a teacher, dedicating herself to educating girls and teaching them kindness, resilience, and courage. The shadows that had once clouded her heart were replaced by a commitment to serve others. In the quiet moments, when the palace buzz died down, the prince would find Neria in the garden or the music room, playing her mother's harp. The melodies were soft, flowing like rivers of memory and hope. Around them, their children gathered, wide-eyed and enchanted by the stories woven into the music. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned shades of pink and gold, the prince watched Neria play. Her golden eyes gleamed in the twilight, reflecting all the battles fought and the victories won. In those eyes, he saw a kingdom transformed, not by magic alone, but by the strength of a woman who refused to be broken. No darkness, no cruelty, no hatred could ever destroy the true light of her spirit. And that light would shine for generations to come, changing the kingdom forever.